How to Get Rich, Part 3 by Donald Trump, President of USA. Start visualizing positively. Positive thoughts will create positive visuals. Have you ever heard someone say, I can just see it, when they are enthusiastic about something? I know from experience that if I can see something as a possibility, it has a much better chance of happening than if I can't see it happening. Give your higher self a chance once in a while by giving your possibility quota a boost. Keep a book of inspiring quotes nearby so you can change a negative wavelength the moment it descends on you. Here are some of my personal favorites. Know everything you can about what you are doing. My father, Fred Trump. I know the price of success, dedication, hard work, and an unremitting devotion to the things you want to see happen. Frank Lloyd Wright. Leader has the right to be beaten but never the right to be surprised. Napoleon. Let's avoid subtlety on this one. Charles Rees, Executive Vice President of Development, the Trump Organization. He who looks outside his own heart's dream, he who looks inside his own heart's awakens. Exciting is a dull word for the business we are in. Fred Trump. You are the only guy who can wear a Kashmiri overcoat to a baseball game and get away with it. Regis Philbin. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Albert Einstein. Continuous effort, not strength or intelligence, is the key to unlocking our potential. Winston Churchill. I remember when I was the Donald Duck. Cartoon in the New York. I remember when I was the Donald. Read Carl Jung. I find reading psychology and self-help books useful. Carl Jung's theories fascinate me and keep my mind open to my own and the collective unconsciousness. Reading his books can also be a good form of self-defense. There is a lot we don't know about ourselves. Like there is a lot we may not know about everyone else. Jung used the word psyche to refer to both the conscious and the unconscious processes. That's where the word psycho comes from, by the way. I first became aware of Jung through an acquaintance who had endured some extreme ordeals, yet he remained calm. I couldn't fathom where he got this sort of grace under fire demeanor, so I asked him, and he told me that Jung's ideas kept him centered. My friend put it like this: Donald, I have learned from my experiences. As a safety factor, I very often see other people as a revolver that could be pointed at me. They are the gun. I, however, am the trigger. So I speak and tread carefully. It's an effective visual aid to avoid conflicts, as I was unwittingly among people who were actually psychos underneath their dignified personas. We never know what will trigger another person's killer instinct. It can be something that happened when they were 5 years old. So avoid being the trigger, and the revolver will not be a threat. This synopsis of philosophy made such an impact on me that I immediately started reading about Carl Jung. I'm glad I did because it helped me in my business as well as in my personal life. We are all evolving human beings, and being aware of this gave me a big boost towards maturity. It also made me less inclined to be surprised by so called aberrant behavior. I have to stress that I am not cynical, but I am aware. I hate being in situations where I am asking myself, how could this have happened? This reminds me of my favorite quote from Napoleon about being surprised. A good leader shouldn't be. You have to know yourself as well as know other people to be an effective leader. For me, reading the work of Carl Jung was a step in the right direction. If someone had told me in business school that studying psychology would be important for financial success, I would have not believed it. My friend's story changed that, and I am grateful to him for such cogent advice. The relatively small number of hours I have spent reading Jung have been more than worth it. Start with his biography. My friend's story changed that, and I am grateful to him for such cogent advice. The relatively small number of hours I have spent reading Jung have been more than worth it. Start with his autobiography. Memories, dreams, reflections, and you will be in for a fascinating time while simultaneously fine tuning your intuition and instincts. You will also gain a technique for seeing into versus reading into the people around you. Believe me, this will serve you well on many levels. The word persona has an interesting root. It came from the Latin means mask. This, however, is not derogatory, it's necessary. Each of us has a persona. We need it for survival. It's the face we put on for public use, and it can be intentional or unconscious. For example, a salesman who has lost his entire family in an accident is naturally devastated, but to work effectively with his customers, he must appear cheerful and confident. That's part of his persona. It's a survival device. The only danger is when people became their personae. That means something has been shut off somewhere along the line, and these people will end up hiding behind the false personality that works professionally. As I am very much in the public eye, this hit home and I gave it considerable thought. Fortunately, I am aware of my public side as well as my private side, and while I am not the one for hiding much, I know there are several dimensions with which I operate. That's the one reason I feel at home the Trump organization. The people I work with day in and day out know I am not entirely a glam guy. They see how hard I work. One person said I am very much like a Mormon, which I took as high praise. Anyway, reading Jung will give you insights into yourself and the ways in which you and other people operate. Have an ego. As you know, this rule has been easy for me to follow, but hear me out. I have got a good reason for it. Have a well developed ego, contrary to popular opinion, is a positive attribute. It is the center of our consciousness and serves to give us a sense of purpose. I remember saying to someone, show me someone with no ego and I will show you a big loser. I was trying to stir things up and provoke a reaction, but I later realized the basic idea is on target. The ego works to keep our conscious and unconscious aspect in balance. Too much either way can be detrimental. No ego means very little life force, and too much means a dictatorial personality. Keep your ego in a healthy balance for your own well-being as well as for those around you. Strive for wholeness. It's an intelligent approach to life and business. Understanding how egos work can be a great tool. Did you ever notice how you can deflate an opponent by simply saying, yeah, whatever you say? By doing this, you are gently assuming a no ego position, which disarms the other person while at the same time taking the wind out of their sails. It gives you the peace of mind necessary to allow you to concentrate on something more important than dealing with someone who is playing God. Sometimes, rather than confronting a tyrant or a psycho directly, it's more effective to keep the knowledge to yourself and proceed accordingly behind the scenes. We have all heard the saying that knowledge is power. The intelligent use of that power is crucial in the business world, and it's just as important in your personal life. Your mind can build castles. Just make sure the foundations are in place first. You and the people around you will be grateful for that. Keep critics in perspective. I am in any job if you will be criticized at some point. Let's face it, nobody but a total Massachusetts wants to be criticized. There is constructive criticism, then there is destructive criticism. Here is how to assess both types. First of all, consider the source. Should this person's opinion even matter to you? If it does matter to you, take a few minutes to consider whether anything helpful can result from the criticism. Others can often see things that we have overlooked. Use their keen eyes to your advantage. Critics serve their purpose. Sometimes they serve a larger purpose, and sometimes they serve their own purpose. American Idol judge Simon Cowell can be critical of the performer on the program, but he is fair and he is honest, and I don't think American Idol would work without him. Simon was nice enough to compliment the apprentice in an interview. I think it's absolutely fantastic, he told the Daily News. I think Trump is superb on the show. He is not hamming it up. He's just playing himself, and that's very hard to do on television. As I said, Simon is a fair and honest critic, and I am a fan of his. Everyone has an opinion. In most cases, it's not worth the paper it's written on. If the opinion is worth the paper it's written on, and it's written in a paper people are buying and reading, then realize that if people didn't find you interesting enough for public consumption, they wouldn't be taking the time to criticize you. Think of their criticism as a compliment, proof of your significance. Homework is required and there will be a test. People who think achieving success is a linear A to Z process, a straight shot to the top, simply aren't in touch with reality. There are very few bona fide overnight success stories. It just doesn't work that way. Success appears to happen overnight because we all see stories in newspaper and on TV about previously unknown people who suddenly become famous. But consider a sequoia tree that have been growing for several hundred years. Just because a television crew one day decides to do a story about that tree doesn't mean it didn't exist before. In 1955, Gould, the classical pianist from Toronto, rocketed to international fame by recording Bash Goldberg variations. He was young and unusual, but he had already been practicing the piano for close to 20 years. He may have seemed like an overnight sensation to the general public, but anyone who has been working at something for 20 years isn't likely to agree with that assessment. I have to admit that my knowledge of classical music is limited, but from what little I have read on the subject, I know that the process of becoming a classical musician is a long and demanding one. The amount of practice hours required to master an instrument is astounding and also never ending. How do they do it? I'm not sure, but I would guess that passion plays a large part. Every industry and profession has its bottom line for what is required to success. If you can't stand to practice every day, being a musician is out of the question. If you hate to exercise, being an athlete is not for you. In business, every business, the bottom line is understanding the process. If you don't understand the process, you will never reap the rewards of the process. You will never last long enough to achieve your overnight success. Part of the process is doing your homework. You have to know what you are getting into first. That was one of my father's strongest beliefs. We have all heard the phrase, you are barking up the wrong tree. It brings to mind a funny image, but in reality, it can be embarrassing. Not doing your homework can result in something analogous. So do a few things first to avoid this. We can learn from our mistakes, but it's better to learn from our successes. When I hear people say, well, it was an interesting experience, I usually safely assume they are referring to something that didn't work out the way they had planned. I don't find my goof ups to be amusing or interesting. Can you imagine hearing a surgeon, well, it didn't go quite right, but I sure learned a lot. I wouldn't want that guy operating on me. The same applies to anyone in business, because if you are in business, it's not just your money involved, but very often the money and well being of the others as well. In my business, I can't take chances. If something is not quite right with the design or construction of a superstructure, a lot of people could be injured or killed. I have got to know what's going on. Bottom line, it will be my responsibility. People see the finished product. Wow, a skyscraper. What goes into it is another story. Construction isn't glamorous. It's a serious and often dangerous endeavor. Fortunately, I understood this from my very earliest days in my business. So there is a certain gravity in my approach to the construction of any building. That's where having learned to do my homework comes in handy. It's a necessary requirement, not an extracurricular course to enhance my productivity. Not only do I have to know exactly what I am doing, but I have also got to make sure I find contractors who know exactly what they are doing as well. That's why I am tough on them, and that's why I am equally tough on myself. A lot of lives are at stake in our work. We don't want any interesting experiences. We all know what it's like to pretend to study. There are some courses in school that just don't hold your attention. If you are choosing a career, keep that in mind. What most holds your attention? Consider a pyramid. Did you ever notice how large and the solid foundation is? Did you notice the carefully graduated levels that eventually led to the pinnacle? Now turn the pyramid upside down. That's a representation of topsy-turvy thinking. You don't start at the top. You start with the foundation. The stronger, the better. The world moves along at such a fast clip that we have little patience when things are slow. Whether it's the line at the supermarket or internet access, we have become intolerant of those things that cannot be accelerated or skipped entirely. I can't speed up the foundation work for a building, nor can I accept to play piano like Gould. just because I want to. Know the limitations as well as the possibilities of everything you do. Find out as much as you can yourself about what you plan to do, and don't expect anyone to act as your favorite grandmother in wanting what's best for you. Most people want what's best for themselves, not for you. If those people have already spent a great deal of efforts on their homework, why should they share it with you? Listen to a ping pong game. I learned a long time ago to listen, but to listen judiciously. You can learn a lot from people around you. Just have to be discerning about the information that comes your way. A lot of so called information I received turns out to be someone's personal opinion. We are all entitled to our 2 cents worth, but sometimes that's all it amounts to. Be aware of the marketplace, know what's going on now. That's one reason I devote several hours a day to reading. That's how long it takes to both keep up with current events and learn from the greats in history. How can you expect to be successful if your ideas of what's happening in the world is vague and non existent? That's like saying, I know that September 11 happened, but I choose not to acknowledge it. It gets in the way of my positive outlook on things. That approach is fine if you are a professional fairy tale writer. There is another side to everything, so develop your ability to say it or even hear it. I once met a young woman from Hong Kong who worked on Wall Street in emerging markets. She had an uncanny ability to predict certain events in the marketplace. It seemed almost like a psychic gift to me. One day I asked her how she could be so on target in her work, and she likened knowing and predicting the global market to listening to a ping pong game. At first I thought she was joking, or perhaps just being evasive, but she went on to explain her theory. I'm not kidding you, Donald. When I was growing up, we had a ping pong table in the den, and I could hear the games my brother would play, sometimes for hours. When I was studying in my room, I discovered that I could discern the tilt of the paddle and the outcome of the volley just by the sound of the ping pong ball being hit and the sound of it landing on the other side of the net. I knew the results, the repercussions, and the recovery that would be required to successfully handle what been dealt. Later, I applied this to my work in emerging markets and found I could often predict what could be happening just by concentrating on the world events and thinking of the sound of the ping pong balls being hit around the globe. Ping pong is really the reason behind my success. I was astounded. That's my idea of tuning in. I must add that this young woman had all the education in finance that her position required. She was a bright student. What set her apart from everyone else was the way she applied her knowledge and her keen analysis of the game of ping pong to her work. She may even have done this on an unconscious level initially, but tapping into his resource gave her an uncanny edge. The lesson I learned from her story is never to underestimate the power of awareness. Find out what other people have done to succeed and then be prepared to do 10 times more. There are no guarantees. Comparing ourselves to others is a waste of time. I have heard people saying, well, Mr. Lucky had $1 million before he was 30, and I have worked just as hard as he has. Well, Mr. Lucky has nothing to do with you, your possibilities, your success, and your failure. Don't let anyone else be your yardstick. That's taking power away from yourself in a big way. You have got your own personal blueprint to attend to. We can't all be Tiger Woods, J. Lo, Bill Gates, or whoever it is you would like to be, and sometimes that's a hard fact to face. You may have already experienced defeat. That happens. It happens a lot. But the fact that you have aspirations to begin with is putting you on the road to success right now. No matter how defeated you may feel, you have still got a chance. But it won't happen by itself. Get to work. I'll sum up with two of my favorite quotes. There are no shortcuts to anywhere worth going. Beverly Sills. The harder I work, the luckier I get. Gary Player. Reflect for 3 hours a day. I read an article recently in which European exchange students living in the United States all agreed on one aspect of American life. The noise level here is very high. We seem to avoid quiet moments. Even lapses in conversation as quickly lived with banter and some kind of interference. It made me realize how much I need a certain amount of quiet time, usually about 3 hours a day, in order to stay balanced. It's time I used to read and reflect, and I always feel renewed and refreshed by this. It also gives me material to feed my extroverted nature. For me, the early morning hours are best for this kind of reflection. I am an early riser, usually up by 5 am, which gives me a few hours to read newspapers and magazines of all sorts, local, national, and international. In the evening, after a black tie dinner, I'll unwind by stopping at my local Korean grocery for snacks, potato chips, and pretzels. That will be my dinner. I rarely get to eat at those black tie events, and I would rather have the junk food anyway. Once I am home, I read books, usually biographies. Now and then, I like to read about philosophers, particularly Socrates, who emphasizes that you should follow the convictions of your conscience, which basically means thinking for yourself. A philosophy I tend to agree with. It may not make you too popular, but it's essential for lucid thought, and it's a good way to avoid being part of a herd mentality of any sort. I read as much as I can, but not as much I would like because there are so many constraints on my time. I'm grateful for the contribution Oprah Winfrey has made to our country in regard to reading. In my book, The America We Deserve, I wrote about the deplorable state of reading in this country. Since Oprah decided to do something about it, there has been a noticeable upswing in the book sales, and writers are once again considered to be cool people rather than dinosaurs. I cannot thank Oprah enough for what she has done, and I hope every person in this country realizes the positive influence she has had. We all owe Oprah a big thank you, and I would like to lead the crowd in saying so. I like movies and television as much as anyone else, but reading is a form of replenishment for me. The potato chips and pretzels help too. Dress for your culture. I used to pride myself on buying very inexpensive suits and other clothing. It just didn't make sense to pay thousands of dollars for great clothes when you could buy something for $100. What would know the difference? Over the years, I have learned that this is wrong headed. I now buy very high quality shoes and they seem to last forever, whereas the cheapos used to wear out quickly and always looked at as cheap as the price I would paid for them. The same is true for suits. These days, I go for Brioni, whose service and attention to detail is second to none. They supplied most of the clothing for the apprentice, so I have tremendous loyalty to them, and I got a good deal. They also make great overcoats. The way we dressed say a lot about us before we ever say a word. To me, dressing successfully means understanding your environment, knowing the culture, and making an effort to reflect and respect it. The look in Beverly Hills may be attractive, but that same look may be met with scorn on Wall Street. The success is hard enough to achieve without showing up on casual Friday in a three-piece suit. Don't put up unnecessary hurdles for yourself. Make it easy for people to take you seriously. I would wonder about someone who arrived for a meeting or an interview and was dressed inappropriately for the culture of that particular workplace. For example, a guy showing up at Trump Tower in a cowboy hat, boots, and a fringed cowhide jacket. It's more about culture than style. Be aware of your surroundings and dress accordingly. Some people can get away with anything, most people can't. Misha Koipel, who works at the Trump organization, usually looks like a Canadian Mountie in full regalia. To look at him, you would think he was about to lead an expedition through the Rockies. Then again, my buildings are tall and he scouts the right location for them. So maybe there is a reason for his get ups. It works for him and he does a good job, so I don't mind. It's certainly not groundbreaking news that the early victories by the women on The Apprentice were to a very large extent dependent on their sex appeal. The fact that sex sales is nothing new. However, women are judged harshly when they go too far, so be careful in how you present yourself. If you want to be acknowledged for your intelligence as well as your beauty, don't stand in your own way. Not everyone can tune out a knock and dead appearance. Think of how you would like to be perceived and proceed from there. I tend to notice what people are wearing only if they look exceptionally well put together or exceptionally badly put together. It has more to do with style than with which designer they may or may not be wearing. As I said, expensive clothing usually looks like it was worth the price. Have you ever noticed how we tend to pigeonhole people in certain profession by their appearance? It's a form of shorthand to just be able to say your basic accountant type or a typical advertising type when describing someone. Every profession has a certain look or standard. Just say banker and you have saved yourself 100 words. It's not always fair, but that's how it works. However, you don't have to be a typical thinking anything. For example, Frank McKinney looks like a cross between a rock star and a server dude. Who would never guess by looking at him that he is a real estate entrepreneur who sells ultra high end residential real estate in Florida? When he speeds by you on his motorcycle in his Versace vest with his 2 feet of blonde hair blowing in the wind, you can bet he's on his way to a business meeting. But that's Frank's style and he's very successful. I'm a conservative dresser due to business consideration and to save time. I enjoy flamboyance in other people. I'm more interested in what a beautiful woman might wear than in anything I might ever put on. Be aware that your attire can literally become a costume. I have known a lot of terrific looking scoundrels and a lot of well dressed bums. Being tasteful is being tasteful, no matter what line of work you are in. Sure, it helps to have the money to buy great clothes, but a little style can go a long way. Part 2. Money, 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 money. Here I am on the top of Trump's World Tower at the United Nations Plaza. I like to check up on things even without my helicopter. Be your own best financial advisor. Many people go out and hire financial advisors, but I have also seen a lot of those advisors destroy people. Athletes, in particular, make a great deal of money at a very young age. Too often, some manager squanders the athlete's fortune and they wind up in their 30s with nothing but their past glory and are forced to get jobs just to survive. A good friend of mine and truly one of the greatest basket players who has ever lived, Kareem Abdul Jabbar, was in the NBA for over 20 years only to find that some bad advice had destroyed much of his wealth. I don't know whether it was theft or stupidity, but it was a shame. Herschel Walker is an athlete who signed big contracts with both the USFL and NFL. One day he came to me and told me he was going to invest in a fast food franchisee. I told him, Herschel, you are a friend of mine, but if you do that, I will not speak to you again. Because of the relationship we had and continued to have, he decided not to make the investment. The company went bankrupt in 2 years later. Herschel is now a wealthy man and he thanks me every time I see him. When it comes to picking a financial advisor, rely on your own judgment based on what you read in the reliable publications like the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Business Week, and Fortune. They are usually terrific, even though on occasion they say some negative things about me. I am angry at Fortune at the moment for good reason, but even Fortune sometimes manages to awake from its stupor to report something worthwhile. I am particularly impressed with an editor there named Geoffrey Colvin, who is also the host of Wall Street Week on PBS and has written perspectively about corporate restructuring. The New York Post has developed a truly great business section and one that is fun to read. Lately, the New York Times coverage of business has gone right to the top. If you read these financial publications for a while, you will start to pick up on the cadence and get a feel for what's happening in the market, which funds are the best, and who the best advisors are. Stay with the winners. Often you will read about somebody who has made money quickly and then relies on one of his friends to invest his fortune. That friend has no track record, and if it weren't for his connection to the rich investor, he wouldn't have any money. Beware of instant stars in the world of finance. Trust the people who do it again and again and who are consistently ranked high by the 4 best business media outlets. But trust your own common sense first. Invest simply. There are numerous firms that provide comprehensive charts and other information on the best returns from certain financial advisors and funds. Study those charts and not over the short term. Maybe they just got lucky, but over the 15 or 20-year period. Invest with the help of a major firm like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Bear Stearns, or Merrill Lynch. These are your hard earned savings at stake. Don't take unnecessary risks. Generally, there is a reason for success. When you look at legends like Ellen Ace, Greenberg, and Warren Buffett and marvel at how good they are, you will likely see that what makes them so successful is the same quality you should apply to every one of your own investments: common sense. I have read many of Warren Buffett's annual reports. In every case, what fascinates me is that he is able to reduce things to the simplest of terms. Many accomplished Wall Street gurus can make you dizzy with talk of intricate financial maneuverings. They might impress you with their sophisticated computerized trading results, their 50% returns from options on products that may not even exist yet. Fortunes are won and lost every day in these markets, but as far as I'm concerned, those folks would be just as successful if they ditched their hedge funds and put all their money on their favorite roulette number at the Trump Taj Mahal Casino in Atlantic City. You paid good money for this book, and I know you are expecting sophisticated investment advice. The wisest thing I can tell you is to invest only in products you understand, with people you know you can trust. Sometimes the best investments are the ones you don't make. Get a prenuptial agreement. I have said it before. I even wrote a chapter on the art of the prenup in one of my other books. But I will say it again for anyone about to propose. A prenuptial agreement doesn't mean that you won't allow love your spouse. It doesn't mean that you have doubts about the person's integrity or questions about the relationship. All it means is that you recognize that life, especially the parts involving love and business, can be complicated. People have a right to protect their assets. If you're if you own your own business and you are facing a difficult divorce without having a secured prenuptial agreement, your negligence could jeopardize the livelihoods of your employees. I know plenty of women who are supporting their husbands, and this advice applies equally to both the sexes. If I hadn't signed a prenup, I would be writing this book from the perspective of somebody who lost big. We needed a bus to get Ivana's lawyers to court. It was a disaster, but I had a solid prenup and it held up. A friend of mine is married to a woman who stands only 5 foot 2, but he is petrified of what she will do to him in court, all because he didn't get a prenup. Before he met this woman, he had had 4 unsuccessful marriages, yet he told me, Donald, I'm so in love with this woman that I don't need a prenuptial agreement. I didn't have the courage to tell him what I was thinking to myself. Loser. A year later, the marriage was over, and he was going through hell. When I saw him, he looked like a frightened puppy. There is nothing wrong with common sense. Be like Thoreau and simplify. Cut out the middleman. Wayne Newton is a great friend of mine, and he made a lot of money over the years. Unfortunately, given terrible advice, he lost his money and was forced to declare bankruptcy. Meanwhile, his lawyers were eating him alive. He called me and said, Donald, I heard you owed $9.2 billion to 100 banks in the early 90s and you never went bankrupt. How did you do it? Because I just can't seem to get out of this mess. My lawyers are making a fortune and the banks are impossible. I asked Wayne how many banks were involved. He told me it was 3. You are lucky, I said. I had 99 banks and I made a point of becoming best friends with everybody at every bank. You have to do the same. I gave him some more advice, which he has generously acknowledged in my many interviews. I told him, Wayne, you are a great celebrity. Have your secretary call the 3 banks and get the person who is really in charge, not the figurehead, and personally talk to all the 3 people. Arrange a meeting with them, ideally a dinner with them and their families. Get to know them. At the end of this period of time, they will like you. They will be impressed by you because you are a celebrity. They may control a lot of money, but they don't control fame, and people are impressed by fame. Forget your lawyers. They are never going to want to settle the case because then their legal fees stop. You must do it yourself. Call the bankers. Become friendly with the bankers and make a deal. Wayne called me 3 weeks later. He would had a dinner with all the 3 bankers and said they were among the nicest people he would ever met. They brought their wives and children. Later, he cut deals with every one of them. The banks were taken care of over a period of time. The lawyers did not get any richer, and today Wayne is doing fantastically well. You are probably wondering how this rule applies to your life if you are not headlining a major Las Vegas show. Here is how. Wayne took control of the situation. He appealed to the people in charge. Most of us need lawyers at some point in our lives, and we all have to deal with large bureaucracies. But sometimes you need to go right on the top, and you need to do it yourself. You don't have to sing Danke Schoen to make a sincere personal approach. Of course, there will be times when lawyers are essential. Some people are scoundrels. In these instances, sue the bastards, but whenever possible, settle. It saves a lot of time for everyone involved. Teach your children the value of a dollar. My kids know the very value of money from example. They see how hard I work. I don't talk about it with them because I don't have to. They have eyes. They see the way I live. I turn off the lights whenever I leave the office. I am always happy to get a good deal, whether I am buying a building or buying supplies at Duane Reade. Trust me, you can get a good deal on shaving cream there. I always remember the example my parents set for me. I could see their determination and discipline. They didn't have to harp on it. I try to be the way they were. My parents were frugal in the sense that they knew it wasn't easy to make money and that it should be treated with respect. They lived well but simply and were not flamboyant in their spendings. We rarely went out to eat. We took relatively few elaborate vacations. They emphasized schooling and education. We had a solid family life, and I remember feeling very fortunate. Each of us was expected to contribute something not only to the family as a whole but to society. That is a Trump's family value that is ingrained in me and one I have tried to live up to. With my mother at New York Military Academy. With my father, Fred Trump, in the early days. My children have been benefited from affluence as I did, but it's surprising how unspoiled they are in many ways. They have budgets and live within them. They have limits on their credit cards and they have them more for protection in an emergency than for anything else. When they were growing up, both of my sons earned extra money during their summer vacations by mowing lawns, cutting trees, moving stones, and doing landscaping work at the Seven Springs Estate in Westchester. Ivanka attended the School of American Ballet, which requires an enormous amount of discipline and training. College kids today are more money savvy, perhaps, than kids from earlier generations. They seem serious about their money. This is a good sign because the sooner you understand the value of money, the more likely you are to possess large amounts of it. If your children see you being careless with money, they will assume it's okay for them to be careless. Children watch. That's how they learn. Your priorities will often become their priorities. Any family can have a wild card or two, but on the whole, it's been proven that children will learn from what they see. If you obviously enjoy going to Las Vegas to gamble, it's likely they will think this is a good thing and will follow suit. If you like to going to Carnegie Hall and bring the kids along, they will think this is an exciting event because you do. Children inherently like to please, so think about the values you exhibit. Sooner or later, kids will form their own tastes, but the initial exposure is important. With my three eldest children, Dawn, Junior, Ivanka, and Eric and Barbara Walters, for an appearance on 2020. I spent a good deal of time with my children, Dawn, Junior, Ivanka, and Eric, when they were growing up because we lived all together. We remain very close. I spend less time with Tiffany as she lives in California with her mother. I do try to include them in my travels and activities as much as possible. They know they are always welcome to join the family business. Don Jr. began working full time at the Trump Organization in September 2001. Trumps are builders, he told Barbara Walters in a recent interview. I hope Ivanka, Eric, and Tiffany might also consider a career with us, but it's their decision entirely. I have a very high standards, but so do my kids. They are all high achievers who enjoy working and are not goof offs in any sense of word. I wonder why I am so lucky. With my youngest daughter, Tiffany. Not teaching your kids about money is like not caring whether they eat. If they enter the world without financial knowledge, they will have a much harder go of it. Make sure you let them in on your way of thinking about money, how you manage expenses, how you save, where you invest. Let them know that having money isn't necessarily a sign of greed. It's an important element for survival. Just getting a first apartment can be a lesson for your kids. They suddenly learn about security deposits. Equip them for life as best you can. Buy them a subscription to Money or some other personal finance magazine. Give them incentives for saving their allowance. If they don't learn about money from you, who is going to teach them? Part 4: The Secrets of Negotiations. Negotiations, anyway, anyone? Here I am with George Foreman and Lennox Lewis. If you have them by the balls, their hearts and minds will follow. In this part of the book, I want you to tell you about some of my favorite deals and essential rules of negotiation they exemplify. First, though, here is my basic philosophy of how deals are done. It's all about persuasion, not power. Power is merely the ability to convince people to accept your ideas. Just because I am a successful businessman doesn't mean I always get my way. It's true that I don't have to be as vociferous about things as before. I don't have to act like a bulldozer to get attention, but I have to coax and make my case just like any other negotiator. An interview from Brazil recently asked me what the best part and the worst parts of the having so much money and success were. I had the same answer to both the question: the effect it has on people. Anyone in a position of power will probably agree with me. There are pluses and minuses. The plus side is that people will listen to you more readily than if you aren't on the map financially. Minus side is that they will reduce you on one dimension and keep you there. People is not just about calling all the shots, it's about ability. You can call all the shots, but if they are bad ones, no one will take much notice after a while. Know what you are doing. That's where the real power comes from. Convincing others has a lot to do with understanding negotiation. Study the art of persuasion, practice it, develop an understanding of its profound value across all aspects of life. Don't expect people to believe your blarney simply because you are good at delivering it. The boardroom is not the pub down the corner. Make it easy on the people you are trying to convince. Give them readily accessible metaphors and analogies. If you are too far over their heads, they will feel frustrated or worse, inferior. Let them know you are all on the same level in some way. Use humor. It's a great icebreaker. I sometimes tell people that I wish our meeting had been yesterday because I was having a great hair day and they missed it. Convincing the other people of how wonderful you are and how lofty your ideas are is a good way to convince them to tune out, or better yet, to escape from you as soon as possible. We all need to have a wealthy dose of confidence to be convincing, but don't bulldoze. If you do, you may see a lot of people in front of you at first, but the room will soon be empty. As the adage goes, there is a fine line between acceptance and resignation. You want people to accept your ideas, not merely be resigned to them because they think they can't fight back or are just plain exhausted by you. Don't browbeat them into believing you. Let them think the decision is theirs. It will give them a feeling of control. Here is the golden rule of negotiating: he who has the gold makes the rule. If you walk into a negotiation and know nothing about the other party, let them talk. Listen to their tone, observe their body language, and determine whether they really want to make a deal or just show you how smart they are. Most negotiations should proceed calmly rather than in a hostile manner. However, sometimes a negotiation works best after a few screams and some table pounding. The best negotiators are chameleons. Their attitude, demeanor, approach, and posture in a negotiation will depend on the person on the other side of the table. If the other party to the transaction wants to acquire something you own, let them convince you that you really don't want it or need it. In doing so, they will convince you of just how badly they want it. Money is not always the only consideration for exchanging the sale of an asset. Think beyond the traditional boundaries. Learn the value of saying no. View any conflict as an opportunity. Most important, know the party on the other side of the table. before sitting down with them. Research who you are dealing with, how they negotiate, and what they want from you. Now you are ready to deal. The following stories illustrate these basic rules.